So we're here at Studio AKA headquarters. Um, Welcome to the London International Animation Festival, folks.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
And would you like to introduce yourself rather than me fumbling it, starting with Marcus on the left?
Sure thing. I'm Marcus Armitage. I'm an animation director here.
That's it?
Oh, yeah?
No, okay.
Yeah.
But you're so much more.
Well, yes, we'll find that out.
I'm Philip Hunt. I'm one of the partners and also a director at Studio AKA, obviously.
I'm Sue Goff. I'm one of the partners and CEO here.
I'm Nikki Kefford. I'm producer here.
And Christian Andrews, another animation director.
Thank you very much. And look, thanks very much for making this time. I know how hard it is to get a bunch of you in the room at the same time. And we really appreciate it here at the London International Animation Festival. So thank you. I'm going to kick off with a question which you're going to expect, and that is, do you tell us about the genesis of Studio AKA and why it was formed, and maybe how it was formed? And Sue, I think you're going to lead on that.
Yeah, I can lead on this. So we were born out of another company, Pizzazz Pictures, which was at the time a very traditional 2D animation studio that was sort of led by 2D animation experts. And so the work that we predominantly were doing there was commercial based. And it was more about agencies coming to us with animation ideas, and we would just make beautiful pieces from that. And what changed was when the partnership changed. So when Philip and I started Studio AK, and then Mark then sometime later came on board, we had two missions really for that company. One was that we were actively looking for directing talent that had a focus on design and illustration too. And we were also in that part of it, we were encouraging agencies not to come to us just to facilitate their ideas, but actually coming to us right at the beginning of the process so that we could be with them on that journey and come up with a creative solution with them. So we were driving that, and we were nurturing talent then within the studio to grow. Plus, alongside that, we were trying to make space for our own projects and look, what we called long form. It's actually short form now, but at the time it was really long form. And that was going to be our mission. We were going to try and move forward in that with that kind of I suppose mission.
So you had a clear sort of sense of where you were going and what you were doing. This wasn't a kind of accidental sort of oh, let's set up a company and the like.
No, because I think we had a good established company. The direction of the company had changed, and there were more opportunities there. And I think our focus was much more on driving projects from the get-go, as opposed to being a facility to provide just beautiful animation. And that was a big shift.
Yeah, I mean, just to add to that, there was a big shift as well from some of the agencies we worked with who came to us without really knowing how they wanted something to look. And they started asking us, have you got any, what ideas have you got? And then suddenly there was this opportunity to pitch multiple routes on things. And then within that came this other opportunity, which was, a director who'd been predominantly doing, say, cartoon or character-based stuff, might pitch something wholly out of character or very different. And that was a big light bulb moment for us. We realized that the directors didn't have to be led by their show reels and what they'd done. They could be led by, or the work could be led by what they might do next. And so one of the sort of, I think, the tenets of the studio and the directors we have is they have very, very strong personal styles and things that they do, but they're incredibly adaptable. And I think that this approach to working has meant that, when we're presenting a pitch, for example, the client doesn't know, if you're seeing 4 or 5 routes, who did what. And so, that way they're not bringing any preconceptions or assumptions about what a director does. Sometimes that works. It works. You can pull out a piece that a director has done, put that forward and say, this is the person for you on this project. But often as not, it's a real opportunity for a director to keep reinventing themselves and testing themselves and trying new things. And that's been a really big cornerstone of AKA, I think.
And actually,
Yeah,
adding to that, I think we were a bit unusual at the time because we chose to have quite a small roster of directing talent. You know, everybody else had very big rosters. You know, our philosophy was have everybody in-house. Out of sight was sort of, you know, unseen. And if we had everybody with us, it was much more of a collaborative approach to things, so we could get everyone around the table. I think that was as a different
at the
model.
time. I think it's fairly normal now.
Yeah.
So.
Well, you say at the time, and of course, you know, this is, I think it's 1989. Am I right there? Are we talking about?
It was more like the early 2000s.
Okay. So
Yeah.
I was going to ask you about. Sorry, I know there's going to be a lot of this cutting over each other, but I was going to ask you about, you know, how things have changed without sort of wistfully looking back too much, but you know, what's changed in animation and the work you do over that span of time? What are the main differences now to then?
Well, I'll put my hand up on this one as the oldest director sitting here. You know, I trained on film and magnetic tape and, you know, physical media. And so for me, the big change, in fact, the only change I thought I would see in my career was the move to digital and the sort of the emergence of 3D as something that, you know, was powerful and that we would want to do. It's continued to change. And of course, we're in the middle of another big sort of changeover in terms of technology. But I think the understanding that, you know, you can't learn something and base an entire career on it anymore. It's there used to be whole departments in 2D which are, you know, skills that have just disappeared and they're no longer required. I mean, our 2D work is digital, and you know, a lot of people resisted that, but that's also enabled a lot of 2D work and has I think been responsible for a big sort of renaissance and resurgence in that. That said, I think a project we did last year sums up the scope of the studio now. We did something last year which involved motion capture, digital humans, and every kind of trick, you know, every contemporary trick that we could possibly test out. And in the same project, we had a director, Marcus, who was working with actual charcoal on actual paper. And it was glorious to see something like that. But then even and maybe you want to talk about you know, the process of doing that. And it was a bit of a shock when he suddenly said, buy me loads of charcoal. So
I'm there resisting the change. Yeah, I mean, I think that's bringing it back to the kind of the question of what's changed. The kind of the types of projects have changed, but it goes back, like, I've been here for 7 years, and it's kind of, I started doing lots of 2D things, then more 3D things, and now I'm back in doing some more 2D stuff. It's kind of it's changing constantly from week to week, but I think what we do is try to keep it on what is the kind of thing that you want to do and how do you get to do that, and that's the important bit for me, I feel like, at this point.
I think you're really good at using sort of like a mixture of tools as well. So, you know, it's easy to assume that with all of the charcoal stuff that you did, that's mega traditional, but you were using that in conjunction with Blender, which is a 3D piece of software. And so you're kind of like staging things in really smart ways where you're using this hybrid of sort of like the old ways, but also new as well. And so I sort of wonder if that's a bit of a studio trait, that we just sort of like try and use the tools that are most applicable and get to the end result soonest. But yeah, still have our own individual flair, I'd say.
I mean, hell seems to freeze over an awful lot here. It's like there would have been a time when I would have absolutely categorically said I would never go anywhere near motion capture. And at the right moment, with the right character and the right project, you suddenly realize this is the right tool for this. I'm being stupid by not embracing this. And at the same time, not forgetting that, you know, sometimes you do need to pick up a pencil or a paintbrush, and that's the most direct thing. And I think it comes back to that core belief in the studio, which is we answer in terms of the commissioned work, especially, we answer the brief. We don't impose ourselves on the project. That's the kiss of death. You know, if you say, well, I do this, how can I squeeze this into this project? It shows, and it's, you know, it's lackluster, and it's kind of a slow death from a creative point of view. You're just giving yourself away and spreading it out thinly until there's nothing left. Whereas if you constantly approach stuff and say, you know, what can I see here that would respond and answer this brief? And then the way we often sort of sell it, for want of a better word, is that you create something that's unique to that job and therefore unique to that client. And that's irresistible to a lot of clients when they realize then they're not going to get a version of something they've seen already. They're going to get something which belongs to them and belongs to their project. And I think then there's it's a very good sort of symbiotic relationship, creative relationship, which happens then. And then the last thing I would say on that is all the commercials work and commission work that we've done over the years has been and continues to be a fantastic kind of creative mental workout all the time. You know, you never know what's coming down the wire and what you might have to pivot and work on. And I think that feeds back beautifully into your own work. It keeps you nimble, it keeps you creatively open, I think. And so we've got, you know, got directors here, as I say, worked in different techniques, and you've also done video game work and
Tried.
no, you haven't. Be honest.
Yeah. I mean, it's just about kind of like playing in this wonderful playground of technological tools that we have at our disposal now. It's also very democratized. Like, you know, I mentioned Blender, and there's so many game engines that are free to use, whether that's Unity, which I made my little video game foray with. But also Unreal, which we're using a lot in the studio now to do sort of real-time rendering and stuff. So it's all just sort of like a wonderful toy box to kind of like delve into. And what I kind of get a kick out of is when a tool kind of like offers possibilities, but also little weird restrictions and idiosyncrasies. Because I think as animators, sometimes you love a restriction. It enables you to kind of like just have something to bounce off of. So so that can often be a fun springboard. In terms of like other things that have changed in the industry, I definitely think that there's the landscape of how people consume media, linear media or whatever. It's sort of like vastly different to when I came to the studio like 15 years ago. It was very much sort of like linear stuff on TV. We're now kind of like in an era where, you know, everything's infinitely shareable on social media. I feel like there's sort of like a very educated sort of like populace of people who know good animation now, because it's not so hard to find it anymore. I think when I was coming up, you had to kind of like record late night Channel 4 and you'd be lucky to catch a tiny little snippet of something. And that's how I first became aware of the studio. But now it's all just so much more accessible, and that's had a massive knock on in terms of the commission work that we've done as well. So it's wildly different place.
It's great because you're sort of answering my questions before I've even asked them, which is fantastic. No, that's exactly what I was. It's exactly what I was hoping for, because I was you know, you've brought up some really interesting points with regard to, you know, the technology and your use of new technologies, and, you know, to call it traditional technologies, and the way you're using those. And you've also brought up there, you know, the audience, how the audience have changed. So I want to dive a bit deeper into each of those. But before I do, I guess the third point is how the business has changed. So how has the business changed from back in the day when you first started with all that youthful vigor and vim to now? You know,
There's a business.
We've learnt a lot. That's the first thing to say. I think actually, I think looking back, when we started Studio AK, we were quite pragmatic about commission work. Was our bread and butter. I mean, you know, there was a sort of golden time of, you know, if you were lucky to get a campaign, you might have work for 2 or 3 years on one or two campaigns, and that was fantastic, you know, for us with a business and an overhead. But with that, also, you'd get great gaps of, you know, waiting for jobs to happen, and we would have a big studio. So what were we going to do with that downtime, you know? And actually we made a decision quite early on to go, you know, we've got an enormous pool of talent here. We should be making other stuff. So we should always have a studio project going through. And so really back at, I mean, I think Jojo and the Stars was our first short film. That was 2004 we finished that, but that took 4 years to make. 12-minute film took 4 years to make. And in the space of that 4 years, technology changed. So you know, we were literally putting it to one side, working on a commercial, then bring it back out. And then, you know, sometimes the software completely changed. We'd have a sort of technical problem to deal with. But what that taught us was, everybody loved working on the other projects, not just the commission projects. So that was a really good thing for us to try and bring into the business plan. And then just kind of coincidentally, we started other opportunities came our way. So somebody saw Mark's film. They wanted to. It was Helen. What's her name? Helen Wood. Helen Wood.
Let's just say Helen.
Helen, who wrote a beautiful book called Varmints. Asked Mark to illustrate it. So he did that as a separate project alongside all the other stuff that he was doing. And then we decided to option that and make that film. And so it continued. Then Oliver Jeffers came in and with one of his projects. So we've got this history then of making long form, which was long form to us, alongside all the commission projects that we were doing. And I think all of those opportunities gave people in all departments actually of the studio an opportunity to grow. And actually what was at the centre of all of it was storytelling. And that's what we realised was the most important thing that we do here is we're good storytellers, and we've got amazing talent in our directors about taking an idea and making a good story.
Yeah, I
Just
mean,
as a quick fact check, it's Helen Ward.
thank you.
Helen Ward, I said
Helen.
Ward or Wood?
No, I'm so glad you did that, because that would be unforgivable.
It was a long time ago.
Yeah.
Lovely Helen.
We do. But just to sort of continue on with Sue's point, if you take a film like, you know, Grant Orchard's A Morning Stroll, you know, that was the sort of perfect project, which was just bubbling away in the back of Grant's mind. It wasn't a film to begin with. It was a series of kind of little ideas and tests and experiments, and he was noodling away. That's the word I was looking for. He was noodling away for quite some time before we got wind of it, and then he sort of showed us, and we were able to suddenly say, okay, let's formalize this. Let's make this. Oh, there appears to be a film here, you know, and then something which had taken quite a while at that stage to get a few minutes or a minute underway suddenly became a fully worked out film that, you know, was enormously successful as well. But it was, the conditions were that, you know, you had enough commission work or commercial work that you could find these gaps that people could. I always used to say it's like somebody sitting at one desk and you'd quickly, when they were waiting for client approval, you quickly drag them over to another desk and say, keep working, you know, no downtime. And actually it wasn't quite as harsh as that, but close. But that's how projects like that got done. And then I think in its own way, that spurred Grant on to say, you know, well, we've just done a nice children's film, why don't we make a children's series? The answer at the time would have been, well, because we don't do children's TV shows, and and everything that we're showing we don't like, and it's not really on the radar. Hang on, what's this? This is brilliant, you know. And that process, I think, comes out of a studio environment like that. I think we've formalized that more lately. We've realized that we need to sort of put resources into series development, into bigger project development, because that's going to be a large part of what we do in the future. So we've never been able to really say, here is a plan, here is a methodology. It's kind of always leaning towards, this feels right, this feels like we should be doing this, we should be exploring that, and we don't want to sit still, because you sit still and everything evaporates. So but I know all the directors have always something on the go, you know, and I I would hope.
Yeah.
Yeah, see, must be. Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Christians are doing it in this talk. So, yeah.
And on that point, you know, you mentioned there the way you dealt with a kind of feast or famine is to do your own projects, and there's a certain serendipity that comes from that, and connections are made, and people see the work and say, oh, and it's so it is kind of part of the business as well. But one can always sort of read companies as just like lying there waiting for the phone to ring. And I wondered how proactive you are about going out and drumming up business. Do you do outreach where you go and see companies and agencies and the like and sort of say, hey, we could do some stuff for you, or do you just wait for them to come to you?
I'm yeah, that's because it's changed enormously, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's changed. I mean, I think that, as the guys are talking about the commercial side of things, how that used to be, quite a big part of our business drive and income. The agencies used to be probably 90% of our clients, I would say, whereas now, luckily, they still are a big part of that, but we have probably through the films and, all of the IP outlets that we've sort of created over time, they've kind of gone full circle. So they almost work as a PR drive in themselves. We get a lot of interest in the studio as a result of those. We do our own PR. We do sometimes reach out to agencies. We do sometimes reach out to filmmakers, clients. We've been looking at getting more title sequence work. We've been reaching out into documentary work recently. So there, we do have a push for that, but we're not, I wouldn't say we're super active in that role. We're very lucky that, the studio has a reputation. We get a lot of interest, and I think that they sort of serve both sides of the industry, serve to bring work in different ways. So we're having fingers in lots of pies, and word of mouth actually is been phenomenal for us.
And I think to add to that, also you realise that you can't just blitz everybody. You have to target it. I mean, one of the things I hadn't realised when we started in children's TV with Hey Duggee, you realised no one knew who the studio was. And you think, well, hang on, we've got a decent reputation in the commercials area and everything, but you're invisible in that. And the same is true of documentary. When we started doing a lot of documentary work, and I think I mean, Nikki, you were at the
Emmys.
The Emmys, the documentary, and you realise there's a whole room. It's an entirely different industry.
Yeah.
They don't know anyone in children's TV. They don't care about that. It's a closed loop. And within that, we've realised that actually, rather than just sort of standing shouting in the room, to the entire room, you've got to find the people who are doing the work that you like and target them. So we target directors, we target production companies, in the way that we used to with agents and still do, I suppose.
Yeah, and actually that's the difference as well, is I think we've gone out to people who maybe never would have considered using animation for a project, a live action drama, and we're going, actually, we can tell stories, and suddenly that sort of work has been coming, and it's so in lots of ways much more challenging to do. It covers such a great scope of stuff. But that has been a really big positive, I think, hasn't it?
Yeah. I mean, a good example of that would have been Black Earth Rising, which started as a conversation. I think you were being asked, who would I talk to about something like this?
Yeah.
So us.
But that has led to lots of things. That Black Earth Rising led to us doing title sequences, and has led to me working on Ghostbusters earlier this year. It's led to all of those things, and it's a totally different avenue for the studio as well, and a very different working relationship, because you're working with not an agency, but you're working directly with either the director of that show, and it's a very direct relationship, which is actually quite fun for a change as a director. It's like, I'm talking to the person who's actually making the thing, and it's a very quick relationship, which is quite nice.
And you're not selling stuff as well, which is a bonus. selling stuff has its place.
Yeah.
Yeah, remember,
It's a great
we're selling
thing
dreams.
that we do. But you know, sometimes it's lovely to connect with another creator, isn't it? Who's kind of putting out a piece of drama, a piece of TV, and to kind of like, yeah, be purely creating this piece of entertainment as opposed to a piece of entertainment that's also got an ulterior motive.
So, with regard to audiences, have audiences fragmented over the years? Because I think, Christian, you mentioned the idea of, you know, if you wanted to see animation, it was late night Channel 4 that is where you saw it. But now, audiences, have they fragmented? And when you create a piece of work, what kind of work do you do to ensure that you're hitting the right audience? Are you just playing to the client, or do you do focus groups, or show it to people? How do you connect with audiences yourselves, or don't you need to bother about that because you're merely being commissioned to do X, Y, and Z?
It's different depending on who's commissioning, but often, you know, with the more traditional kind of commissioned agency work, they've done a lot of that sort of research. They kind of know who they're targeting and they know what they want to reference. And so we'll be kind of like taking a leaf from their playbook, but also sometimes try to broaden it out or include something that they might not have thought of in our response. So, so from that sense, it's, yeah, a fairly straightforward process. But when it comes to, I don't know, some of like the Giri Haji job that I did a little while ago, where it's sort of like an animated insert within a Netflix, BBC drama, your role is to kind of like bring this sort of like broader church of all the different animation styles or whatever that you know we're as an industry, you know, quite au fait with, and sort of like educate the live action director and kind of help them decide which route we're gonna go and which one will not only connect with an audience and resonate, but also is, you know, appropriate for that moment within the drama. You know, the point of view is often such an important point, and yeah, always seem to answer this question, well, why animation? So when you're making that leap from a piece of live action television to kind of like an animated scene, there has to be a little bit of a rationalization for that. So whether it's sort of like a dream sequence, of, you know, crazy sort of psychedelic moment, or sort of like memory, you know, that these are often things that we reach for and reasons why animation might be appropriate. So sorry, I'm slightly drifting off here in terms of the audience, but I suppose it's got to land with the audience and feel kind of authentic and rooted in, you know, the piece of media that they're watching.
I suppose we do have to think about it a little bit more. I mean, I'd even say, you know, we're asked sometimes to write scripts for, you know, commission work, things that we would never have been asked to do, you know, years before. Clients that come to us and they have an idea for something that could involve animation, but it's so early they haven't even figured out what they might want to say or how to say it, and so we can get drafted in, you know, all parts of it, you know, music and everything. It's quite interesting. Whereas traditionally in the old day, you were there to be this component, but everything's changed. I mean, when in the sort of heyday of traditional animation commercials, you know, you'd only ever work with 3 people from an agency: a producer, copywriter, and art director. You know, it can be 15 people now, and you do get to meet the account handlers, and you maybe do get to meet the client, and you're part of something much bigger. It's because the way that this is part of a bigger campaign has to be taken into consideration, and you know, you end up you're sifting through a lot more stuff very early on. And I wouldn't want to go back to the other way, really. I think it's much more challenging and creative to be involved as early as we are now. Then to the point which has been said about working, sometimes, you know, we get to work directly with, you know, a Ridley Scott or a Hugo Blick or a Shonda Rhimes, and thank you. And that's great, especially when they're directors who know what they want, but they're also directors who say, look, the reason I'm talking to you is because of these things you've done and this pitch you've shown me. You know, my vision is this, and I want your take on it. and then they know how to say yes and no. That's working, that's not. What's difficult in the industry, you know, overall is I suppose is when people don't know what they want and they know that you can show them everything. And you do have to show them everything. And then you've got to kind of just take a deep breath and say, okay, that's my job here, is to kind of figure out what's inside this client's head and show it to them, you know. And
having said that, some of our best briefs have come from something that's completely wide open. You
That's
know,
true.
some of the things that we've responded to where, you know, sometimes when it's very, very niche, we're kind of like, ooh, and then you have these really wide open, we're kind of, you know, you have that situation where you think, wow, where are we going to start? And then suddenly, you know, and that's where the collaborative director's perspective is brilliant, because, you know, as part of our pitch process, we tend to, everyone goes off, comes up with some ideas, then everyone collaborates again, and that really spurs everyone forward. And I think that in itself is probably fairly unique in the studio.
it can be quite, I think it can be quite daunting for less experienced or newer directors to suddenly realize they've gone off to work on something and come back and they're sitting at the table with all the other directors explaining themselves, and you'll get somebody who'll go, well, why don't you do that? And you suddenly think, oh God, you know. But it's a sort of necessary boot camp in a way. If you can get your ideas through that, you know they're strong. I've always felt, you know, if I'm being taught, you know, the best teachers I ever had were the people who ignored the stuff I was doing really well and zeroed in on the bits that I didn't want them to look at and said, what is this? And I think that sort of group conversation we sort of have it a couple of times, don't we?
Yeah, we'll often have sort of like that initial briefing call where we all kind of come together, and maybe there's a few sort of like harebrained things that kind of sometimes a bit knee-jerk, and then we'll kind of like all depart off into the wilderness and kind of like come up with, yeah, left field stuff sometimes, or, you know, sometimes it is sort of like, yeah, more than the sort of like the mainstream route. Then we kind of all kind of gather the wagons again for another little roundabout and see how off piste people have gone. And yeah, we'll have that big crit where we kind of all get together, which I think to anyone watching who's sort of like a student or whatever, it's just totally the same as having a good old kind of like mentoring session with your tutors, and kind of like, yeah, it's can be quite bruising sometimes to kind of like have your ideas critiqued in such a way, but you always come out of it sort of galvanized, and you know what's wrong, you know how to fix it, and you kind of, yeah, then often in our process we'll have sort of like another little sprint at that point where we kind of like get to refine things, answer all those unanswered difficult questions before sort of like a final sort of editing process where we'll kind of like make sure only the strongest of the strong goes through to the final presentation,
and the rest is killed.
But that's the wonderful thing, and I'm really proud of that sort of generosity that happens, because it is about finding the best solution out of that collaborative process, isn't it?
Yeah, and I've survived. Yeah, somehow.
See,
Made it sound
so much of a nicer way. Why I got so, yeah.
The part of that I really like is, especially if I've been, say, let's say not been involved in taking a brief or even setting that, you know, call initially, like, and I come in, I've been on holiday or something like that, just not showing up for a few days, and I come in and I'm looking at, you know, let's have a look at what's the first part, or even what's about to go to client, and I look at it, and my favorite thing is not to be able to record, you know, and I will say, who did this? I love that. And then, you know, it's often such a surprise, you go, no way. And I think that's really exciting when I see something that Krishna or Marcus or, you know, Mandy or Mark or, you know, any one of the directors has done, and I don't see them in it. I find that most exciting, because it feels like, oh, we just moved forward a notch again. Then I freak out because I go, how exactly are we going to do that? Yeah, it's not really. No. And it's a very good point. Sometimes you've got to sort of take a big swing at something, and
but for me, I like it. But my point of view on this is like, that's what I want to do. I think if it wasn't that, I probably wouldn't be as interested. And I think like when I look back at jobs like the Bodies title sequence, I just put something forward. I've never done anything like that before, but we do have, you know, amazingly talented 3D staff that are here permanently, where you're like, you know, I just need to show them this, and they'll be able to do that. Like they're going to know, and you know, they're all very creative people as well. So they're always looking for the way around to do these things. So I think there's like, for me, it's like there's a confidence that we will be able to work it out, and then also the drive to be like, well, yeah, if we've got that confidence, let's try and do something that I wouldn't do before. And I think that's always the drive in the pitching process for us anyway.
Sort of some unsung heroes, I think, that probably
Yeah.
should be in the room in the 3D department, who are always cashing the checks that we as directors write, and then we're like, how the hell?
Yeah.
You know, they're always there, and we've got, I think, this proven legacy of always being able to deliver on the stuff that we put forward, and it's down to them.
Yeah, I mean,
Lots of blood, sweat and tears.
there's lots of different departments and disciplines and skill sets, you know, within the studio that are kind of underpinning and creating all this work. I tend to refer to everybody blankly as a digital artist, you know, whether they're rigging or lighting or, you know, 3D or artworking or whatever. They're people who, you know, again, they're just as adaptable, because they have to be, because the directors are coming up with this sort of crazy stuff that they need to do. And they like that too. I mean, the feedback we often get from a lot of the team is, I like it when I'm, you know, jumping from one crazy thing to another, and I don't like it when I'm just sat in the same furrow, in the same rut, doing the same thing over and over and over again. Although, you know, then you get into series work, and that's exactly what you're doing, the same thing over and over again, and it becomes a different focus then, because it becomes about polish and improvement. And, you know, with a show like Hey Duggee, I mean, that team over, was it 5 series now, they keep on upping the bar and saying, why don't we try this, or, you know, doing unexpected things both narratively and with the visual treatment of the show. It's astonishing. And I think that comes from this sort of core studio mentality. If I'm going to be working on this, it's got to be something that continues to give to people, so that
fresh.
Yeah, so that it's enjoyable. And you can tell when a show's not enjoyable to make because it's boring, you know. And Duggee is boring, you know. Duggee Blood.
And that brings me on to the idea of people and talent. And there's a couple of questions I have with regard to this. First of all, you mentioned that kind of the multitude of new technologies and things that you have to keep up to date with, and you mentioned digital humans, you mentioned motion capture, performance capture, etc. So how do you manage to do that? Because, you know, you can't just, you know, you can't spend all day every week sort of learning new stuff, although you may want to. How do you sort of take on board these new technologies and ensure that you can use them within your work?
Start. It's actually, we've sort of already answered it. It's because everybody's doing that to some degree. It's a conversation. So Christian will have seen something, or Marcus will have, you know, I think with Moho, you were the first person to draw that to my attention and say, you know, maybe on a project Steve did, it was the first time we used a tiny bit of EB synth or something like this, or, you know, any of these technologies, or Anna in the 3D department, you know, showed us some facial capture technology, and you know, everyone's been, have you seen this? You share it amongst you, and these things gradually kind of stick together. And then sometimes it's quite, you know, it's the obvious thing is, oh, we should go in this direction. And other times you just suddenly find, well, the entire studio's just drifted in that direction. With our recent sort of foray into Unreal, for example, we saw it coming and we thought, this is interesting. And that was a deliberate decision. We took one member of staff again, and said, who was looking for a change in her career within the studio, had been doing editing and had come from originally from layout into editing, and then was looking for a new challenge. And Anna became our Unreal department for a few months, whilst the rest of the studio sort of working away in Maya and in Houdini and all these other you know, established technologies we have, looking over their shoulders thinking, what on earth is going on over there? once we've figured out what that might be able to do for us, you know, that is then taught to the rest of the studio.
And actually, just to jump in there, Philip, what was really interesting about that was when Unreal came in as an idea, we were developing something, one of our IPs with Mark, and it was a perfect pairing of Epic Games were giving away grants to work on Unreal because they were desperate to get studios like us to start taking Unreal into our other projects. And so we just said, okay, well, let's do this. We'll take this opportunity, we'll make something with it. And that was the start, wasn't it?
Yeah. And we actually, for a short time, we did it side by side. We kind of developed both. It was almost like, okay, then prove it. And then it was quite dramatic. Suddenly we saw not only is this technology capable of doing what we're already doing and we can instantly see where we are. We have choice. We can put a headset on or whatever, go into this world. From a director's point of view, it was really exciting. But just even from a simple production pipeline point of view, and I think because you did bodies in Unreal, didn't you? Just being able to see things so quickly and so with such immediacy, rather than having to guess, you know, how something might look.
Yes, I think for me it was like, as an unexperienced 3D director of having never directed anything in 3D, all of a sudden Unreal was like, oh, I can skip the grey phase where I don't know what anything's going to look like, and I was already in the bit where I was like, okay, yeah, it's going to look something like this, and that made it super quick for me to just get engaged with it and give actual good feedback. So it was pretty helpful at that point as well.
And so, I mean, in any technology, when it's enabling, you know, when it's a tool that enables your creativity and enables the process, that's it. It just becomes part of your tool set and you don't look back.
That feels like that was like one of the biggest changes that we had recently, was that it all, like, we were going in a direction and then that slowly started coming in, and then it was like, we are in this direction now. And then lots of other things happen. They're just, like you were saying, there are lots of little bits that slowly over time get adapted, and that's how, you know, it's not everyone does a training session every time. It's kind of just slowly but surely things start getting added to the workflow, and that's how it changes. And then when if something's big enough, it is like, you know, for a certain job at the minute, everyone's sort of all of a sudden learning Houdini, so there's lots of workshops going on for that kind of stuff. So that kind of happens as well.
It's so often technical, sorry, the you know, the amazing technical talent that we have here. So rather than it being sort of like driven entirely by directors, this technological innovation, so often it's people that are kind of like at the rock face chipping away at something. You know, the Epson example is a great one. So that was you know, we sort of tried to suggest it to Steve at one point, but it was point blank rejected. And so it was Janina, I can't pronounce her surname, sorry, Putzka. She you know, she was at that rock face. She was doing all this very painstaking in betweening, and she was kind of desperate for, oh, there must be another way to do this. And so this this AI kind of keyframe in betweening software became, you know, really perfect application.
I think as soon as Steve realized that it could be used creatively rather than as a substitute, and that you were able then to nudge and to conduct and to control, it was like, that's absolutely fine, let's go for it. But it did, yeah, you're right, it did take a team effort to say, let me just show you what I think this can do for the project.
She didn't show. She
didn't show it.
No,
She didn't tell
it's
him.
all coming out now.
No.
So he was tricked into it, and he couldn't tell the difference. So this is it. It's all about kind of like
Tricking the director.
up management. I think the phrase is, isn't it? Where you're kind of.
So you know, you're bringing on board all these new technologies, etc., and you have to get talent as well. It's a competitive industry. There's lots of companies out there. So how, I was going to say, how easy do you find it to get talent? But I guess, how do you get talent is the question that you need to bring on board for certain projects.
I mean, that quite often the directors are very good at, when they're about to bring in a project, they, you know, they've sort of put their pitch out there, they've got an idea of using a new piece of kit, or, you know, how they're going to do it. We've talked about it internally. quite often they will be a part of that picture. They'll be, you know, looking at who's out there, getting in touch with people they know. I mean, the animation grapevine is amazing. It's we're very, very lucky, I think, in that respect. And of course, LinkedIn is really helpful. And occasionally we use what they call
Social media.
we use an agency. So, you know,
Oh, right.
on very rare occasions we use agencies.
That's when you know
recruitment. Yeah.
Yeah, when you know if you're after a particular
Yeah.
skill set or or talent, you might do that. I think the word of mouth thing is strongest though. And then
we used to be the pub, and now
we go into the colleges, we go into the schools, and but I think more often it's 6 degrees of separation down the line between somebody knows somebody knows somebody, and I always like it when we have a new face in the studio, because effectively if this works, there's a doorway to a whole group of people who you may not have come across before. And that's always interesting.
The other big shift actually with that is that, when we went to lockdown, so we had to, prior to lockdown, we did everything in-house. The studio just kind of expanded and contracted and expanded depending on what projects we were in. So as we went into lockdown, we had 90 people in the building because we were delivering a film for Apple TV as well as everything else that we were currently doing. We had never considered remote working. We just didn't feel like it was something that would work for us. Suddenly, within 2 weeks, we had to consider it, and we had to set 50 people up remotely. And actually what that brought was opportunity, I think, because suddenly we could work with anybody in the world, and then that meant we could consider more projects, because it wasn't about space anymore, how many people can fit in the studio. It was actually being able to work with somebody in Australia, or and that has also been really effective, I think, and
different time zones can be helpful on a tight schedule. I mean, actually, doing that film and having so many, because we had the concept was that anyone who worked for the studio had to have a physical seat in the building.
Yeah.
But actually, the film filled the studio so much that it was quite lucky, because what happened is we had projects coming in, and we had a planner where we would plan who left what seat and where the next person came in, and that went, and luckily we overflowed, and so we had to set up a bit of a remote system, and that happened probably a month before lockdown. So as a result, we had this start of a process in place which served us really, really well in moving into lockdown.
And I think that's remained, and the sort of good parts of hybrid working we've retained, and the studio is populated and busy, but it's not compulsory. We've kind of worked that out with people coming in on different days, and if you're in full time, if it demands it, otherwise there's perhaps no need. I would flag that for me, that the thing I constantly struggle with is the in-between moments which bind a studio's creativity together are those bits where you just happen to be in the building with somebody chatting about nonsense and stuff, and I think it's exceptionally hard for youngsters coming in as well, not to be able to benefit in the way that I certainly benefited from in my early days, where I was sat next to somebody who, had a few decades ahead of me, whatever, and I was able to watch and also ask. I think that's the big struggle for youngsters and graduate. I call them youngsters, graduates. They're all adults. They knew what they were getting into. They just don't have the same access to, studio mentoring. And we have to really try at that now. We have to really kind of.
You're absolutely right. We've got to rethink it. And actually, it came up yesterday. I was at MAF yesterday, Manchester Animation Festival, and I got approached on a number of occasions by people wanting internships, and we had to sort of pause our internship program because nobody was in. It's like somebody comes in, the whole point of that experience is to be sitting next to somebody and to make, work your way around the studio and have a full spectrum, experience. And I did say yesterday, we are going to rethink that.
Well, that's it then, we are.
To make it work, you know, because those
Yeah.
are such valuable moments for people coming into the industry.
But I mean, we are doing sort of similar things, like our work with London Screen Academy is sort of like a great push to kind of like try and bring people into the industry who wouldn't necessarily traditionally end up here, which I think is a big part of kind of the worry with recruiting just through word of mouth, is that you're only getting the same types of candidate. And so we're very aware of that, and we're super keen to bring more diversity into our industry and into the studio itself. But yeah, the LSA mentoring scheme is a great way of trying to ensure that. So yeah, every year we sort of, I think we're taking on two students, and it's a direct kind of mentor-mentee relationship where we're helping these students with their first films.
You're right, because traditionally it was always, yes, we were taking interns, but they were all postgraduate interns from, you know, Gobelin in France, National Film School, Royal College of Art. You know, there's three of them sitting here.
Expensive, exclusive places.
Well, exactly, and you suddenly realise, hang on, it's a very narrow sort of pool of people, and certainly when we started talking to and working with the sort of the 18, 19-year-olds at LSA, you meet a completely different group of people. Also a group of people who, you know, where anything's possible. You know, they haven't yet had any of those reality checks, which unfortunately sort of, you know, start piling up quite quickly. And that's been really exciting. It's been really nice mentoring students who are younger as well. And I do think people's routes into the industry are changing. The numbers of people who are also choosing not to study formal animation, or because they're studying it themselves or online, and there's so many generous artists out there sharing their work. I mean, I forget the guy who does Blender, the Scottish guy, Will Anderson. Will Anderson. I didn't forget his name. It is extraordinary what Will puts online and shares with. And there's a whole generation of people who are animating because of someone like that.
Alex Grigg, he's another good.
Alex Grigg is another great
person
example
in the industry.
Yeah, you know, and
and I saw some of the output from the Young Animators of the Year project and clearly, you know, young people, just not only young people, have access to tools now that, you know, we'd be envious of years ago. You know, I have to ask a question about skills. Obviously, there'll be a lot of students listening to this. Do you give me a few words about, you know, what skills you expect in new entrants? And I don't mean sort of the technical skills, but rather maybe what are sometimes derogatorily called the soft skills. What kind of skills and aptitudes do you want to see in people who approach you for the first time and that you're using as new entrants?
everyone looks at me.
Lee Adams, my tutor, was like words of advice from her were kind of like, work hard, be nice, and don't smell.
So
2 out of 3 isn't bad for me.
So it's quite instructive.
I think it's kind of very particular to the way that the studio works, and it's that collaborative thing that we've been talking about, and that's what kind of has worked the best. You know, it's why probably I've not left yet, or I haven't been kicked out. It's because I can, you know, turn my hand to different things. Like whenever we get an animator in or someone who's willing and is able to shapeshift around and go on to different things, we always keep them, because it always makes sense to keep them around. And that kind of, just that willingness to not just be a one note person is probably quite good. I feel like that works quite a lot.
Willingness to engage and to pivot into to change according to circumstances. Quite often it's the first impressions you get of people of, you know, can they look you in the eye? Can they talk to you? Can they talk about something they've seen, which is interesting? I mean, you know, you're asking people to sort of have all this sort of creative output. It's very interesting to me what input they're interested in and the things that they want to do. And I like it when I meet people and I can. It's not just about what they're doing with their work. It's who they are as people. I do think, you know, a lot of the core skills are always really useful. Just being, you know, drawing by any means, or observational, or interest in sound, or just, you know, image making or something, photography. There's something where they're making things. I mean, I'm a great believer in making by some means. It can be from, you know, working with a pencil to working with, you know, a sophisticated tool I've never heard of. I don't know. I don't care. I just like people who have something to share, or something to say and something to share in a way. I think that's interesting. Those people tend to be extremely valuable as time goes on, because when everybody is stumped and looking and unable to figure something out, it's those kind of people who will say, well, you know what, we could try this. And they can get you out of all sorts of holes. So I don't know, what do you think, guys? Who do you like to meet and welcome with open arms into the studio?
Enthusiasm. They need to be enthusiastic, I think, and
Curious.
keen, willing,
Curious,
curious.
It's sort of wider than just sort of like the creative field as well, isn't it? So you know, we've had some wonderful people come through the studio production and studio managers and stuff, and it's all about kind of, with any kind of recruitment, I suppose, what kind of they can bring to the culture of the studio. So, you know, things like, you know, our football game that we're about to go and play in on a Wednesday lunchtime, things like, you know, board gaming, whether it's just sort of like, yeah, whatever interest it is that people can bring to the studio, it's all a lovely part of this mix, and what makes the place such a kind of like fun, and I don't know, it makes it feel like a family.
Okay. I don't know how comfy those chairs are, but I'm just saying that we're reaching the end now. So just thought I'd let you know. But I have a couple of questions about the future, and one is, we're in a particular time, aren't we? One, it's winter. Secondly, we got a new government, newish government. You know, there's all sorts of things happening. So, what's your take on the current economic and creative climate for animation and the work you do?
God help us all.
I think we have had a very difficult, generally 2024 has been a difficult year for most places, and I suspect 2025 is also looking tricky for some. I think we have tried to be very keep positive in it, to be nimble about what we're doing and how we're doing things. I think with a company our size, that's what we've always done and we've always had to do. And it's about trying to look ahead, future-proof, you know, for any opportunity, any opportunity in any situation we might be faced with. It's an ever-changing landscape. And I think one of the things that we have, I think, done very well is to focus on our own content as well, so that we're always creating something here. If everything else is a bit quiet, we've got something else that's going through, and that at some point may be the next big thing that the studio's doing. So I think we just have to be active in it. All of those things I think come with financing problems, and that again is changing. So the model that was 10 years ago is no longer. Again, it's about listening to the conversation, seeing where your audience is, even things like, you know, where broadcasters are. I mean, where people are going to for funding has changed. That whole model's changed. So even when we're creating content now, we're thinking, where's the best place to put it? You know, because no longer have you got traditional linear platforms that can just fully fund your shows. So you've got to be thinking about all of those things. It's constantly changing.
Ever adaptable.
Ever adaptable, yes.
You kind of need to have a broad spread of things in development. So a good broad slate, because, you know, if you've got 8 or 9 projects or something, you know, I mean, it's sort of fantastic if they all happen. Oh my God. But you just need one, really, truthfully. You just need one to kind of lead the way. and there's your stability. If you rely on such a volatile commissioned market, then I think that's when things get really tricky, because that ebbs and flows like nobody's business. And it's 1 minute you are frantically busy with commission work, and the next minute it's just a desert for a while, and then it's just frantically busy again. And what you're always looking for is something to kind of sit underneath that and say, well, we're making this, and this is a 2 year kind of steady, even keel, which people can cling to and kind of work on and then step away from and what have you. Those sorts of things are really, really vital and important now. And I think, Sue's point, I think we have invested a lot of time and energy in making sure we've got those things moving forward, which is core to the identity of the studio. And there's a number of very, very different projects for very different audiences, and that's deliberate as well. Forgot the question.
Well, as we sort of come towards the end, as you know, if you've been to any conference or any debate over the last years, there's always an AI question. So here's your AI question. Are you using generative AI, and what's your take on its effect on animation production generally?
Well, I feel like it's like incredibly personal, this question, because I think that like between the directors, we've all got very particular opinions on it, and at the minute, like, my opinion is no, I'm not. That's not an opinion. Like, I'm not, and like, last year working in charcoal and things like that is like, there's still value in doing things, and I like the process. I like working with people. For me, like, the more AI I use, the less people I'm going to meet, the less I'm going to do things, and that's an important bit for me in this. So that's my opinion, and obviously opinions change very easily. So it all depends where it goes. But we're active in looking at things and seeing new things. So it's like I'm always seeing what's going on. But right now, I like doing things that are specific to exactly what I want to do. And yeah, that's what I like to do, and I'll keep it that way. But I think we all have very different viewpoints on it.
It's an enormous topic that's touching, every industry, and in terms of us, broadly speaking, that word generative, stuff is a hard no for me, mostly because it usually involves opening up to this, to the internet, to everyone else. It's an aggregate of everybody, rather than what we fundamentally are, which is creative individuals. However, if there are tools such as EV Synth or other ways which can enable me or allow, bring within my reach things, then it doesn't seem to make sense just to say an immediate hard no. I think the problem is that there's this word AI now, which means so many different things to different people. And, I'm not interested in typing into the ether and getting this sort of visual suit back. I can always find something interesting on Instagram that's made in AI that's kind of funky and weird and cool. I'm never that interested in seeing it beyond that. I'm thinking, well, this is kind of cool, but it also looks like that. Everything seems to look like that. But there was a time when I would have looked at 3D animation and said, no, that's not for me. It doesn't have any of the texture. It doesn't have any of the kind of, it has nothing that engages me in it. It's sterile. And that changed. So, perhaps it will be a different kind of charge led by production processes, planning, by just, I mean, if I think about a show, like a long-running TV show, just even the ability to harness AI to really use assets. So, you want a walk cycle for that's particular, or a character doing something. At the moment, that is a very human led resource where somebody's really got to remember or know or have something logged. If you can pull that stuff together, maybe again that empowers your process a bit more. I think we did talk about this because we knew this would come up, and I think we all agreed that any kind of predictions that we would make or any kind of hard assertions we would make would be very foolish, because next week.
Yeah.
Mm.
I mean, but we can talk to the type of stuff that's coming down the pipe to us as well. So although we're not necessarily using AI as maybe we might in the future, it's being used on us. So agencies will come to us with some often kind of like half-baked stuff that's not quite doing what they want it to, that needs sort of like an animator's eye or an art director's kind of touch to kind of like really tweak it and fix it. So we've had a few come down the line like that, and you know, it's a great tool for kind of like visualizing things quickly. So I can see why agencies are reaching for it, but there is a niche there currently for fixing bad AI work. So sometimes
I know the project you're thinking of, and I'll refer to it very, very carefully.
Yeah.
But we were shown a project that had been kind of proofed in AI, and the agency were well aware of the, you know, the six fingers and the kind of smudgy ears and things like that. They said, could you tidy up parts of it? And we had a go, I think, as I remember. We tidied up a section, looked brilliant. Now that was shown to the client, who said, this is great, what's this bit here? So, well, that's what it's all going to look like. No, I want it to look like AI. And it was a kind of a moment where you realize they actually want the AI thing. So they don't want it fixed. And that was a real moment for me. I just thought, oh, I see. You know, it's if that's an aesthetic somebody likes, then they'll go for it. And I think that's something to, it reminds me a lot of when 3D really hit its stride. And every agency would come to us and say, we want it in 3D. And this first question we ask is why? You know, why do you want that? We would try and pitch 2D and say, but this, and they would say, no, it's got to be 3D. Why? Because the kids love 3D. And you cannot get past that wall. I mean, we managed it eventually over time, but there was that period of time where you couldn't get arrested for doing 2D. And I wonder whether, we need to sort of brace ourselves for this, the big onslaught of AI when it finally goes mainstream and it's in everything. But I do believe people will get sick of the look that they can't pinpoint to a human at some point. They can't tell. I'm fond of this really stupid story, which I'll finish on, which is, it's a bit like walking through St Pancras station and hearing a piano and then turning around a corner and you've got a 10-year-old kid playing Rachmaninoff's Third or whatever beautifully. And you will stop and find that awe-inspiring, marvelous, and you have jealousy and also amazement and think, aren't human beings wonderful? Now, this might be dance or anything, but let's just say it's this piano playing. And that's something which just touches you here. Now, if you rewind that and come back around the same corner and you hear the same music, and you turn around and it's the pianola just playing itself, you'll go, oh, that's cute, and you'll carry on walking. It doesn't diminish the fact that it was a perfectly good recording, it just will not connect with you in the same way. And I do feel that a lot about some of the most amazing AI I'm seeing at the moment. I go, yes, but where's the humanity in this? The humanity. That's what we'll finish on.
Well,
the humanity.
Yeah, well, I think talking about humanity, I think we'll finish on a high moment. And I wanted to ask you one last question, and that is, what gets you up in the morning? What are you really looking forward to in the next few months from Studio AKA? Go.
I've got it. We've done a whole bunch of work in the last year, which we're waiting for releases and embargoes to be lifted on. And I'm really excited for that. There's a number of beautiful projects that have yet to see the light of day. And we're just, we're having to we're being invited to talks and we're showing the same old stuff because we can't show the thing we've been working on the last 2 years or whatever. I mean, it's that. We've got a couple of projects which which if they get greenlit, I'd really, those kind of things really make you wake up in the morning. But
we've got a spin-off show for Duggee coming in spring, which is going to be great.
Nice plug.
Yeah, good luck. And also I think we've got a great studio that's full of talent, and that's a nice thing to come to every day.
Yeah, that like on a personal note, it's like what keeps me enjoying being here is that I don't necessarily know exactly what I'm going to be doing from week to week. It's like I don't know if a new pitch comes in, it could lead to something totally different, and that's the fun bit. That's what keeps you going, and it's those kind of you're not quite sure what kind of project's going to come around the corner, and it's potentially not going to be a thing that you've done before, which is the good bit. Because if it's like the same thing, like oh I'm going to do another thing like I did last time, it quickly gets boring, and that's what kind of keeps me going anyway.
I mean, from a
What about you, Nikki?
yeah,
What about you?
from a production point of view, it's also terrifying.
Well, I'm going to say that that's what makes me love my job. Because every day is different. Everything that comes in is a new challenge. Everything the directors throw at it is a new puzzle to solve. You know, everything we're doing is constantly changing, and I think that I think for all of us is something that is really valuable. Keeps us on our toes, keeps us learning. And also the fact that we're all doing it together. So the family vibe of all facing our challenges together.
Well, we should join in song now.
Well, I'm still waiting for Christian's.
Well, yeah, I was just gonna be droll and say, oh, my dog Dingo gets me out of bed, but he's a constant source of inspiration. Yeah, I mean, similar to Marcus, I think, you know, I'll echo what everyone said here, that you just never know what's coming down the pipe next. And that's a wonderful thing that constantly keeps you inspired. So obviously that, and yeah, I don't know, just always being in an industry, doing a job where I just get to draw lots. I think that is just so wonderful. And so probably that's why we're getting a little bit hung up on AI, you know, taking away our ability to do, you know, engage with the craft and the things that we love. But I'm sure there's a future in which they dovetail nicely. So we want to get too down on that stuff.
Well, on that final note, just to say thank you so much, Studio AKA, for imparting your wisdom and on hopefully comfy chairs. But it's great to see you, Philip, Sue, Nikki, Marcus, and Christian. Thanks so much, and see you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye.